if you're counting, you have 5 teams that had first place votes. So clearly a little bit wider. Feels like maybe a bit of a hedge, if you will. A lot of teams that maybe could go and win it all, and we kind of feel that way as well. It feels deeper at the top than it's been in quite some time. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. So happy to have you here with us today. We have it. That's why we're a little delayed today. We normally would have our show out a little sooner, but we had to wait for the AP poll to drop. We have it. We'll give you our initial thoughts on what the Associated Press gave us, some interesting takeaways when evaluating the AP poll from 1 through 25, but maybe even some of the more interesting aspects of it are those that are the first out, which very interesting to say the least. We also need to get into some camp confidential. Okay, we want to dive into what we've heard, whether it's sources out there, insider sources, just some scuttlebutt, if you will. We've done some digging over the last few weeks, and we're going to highlight 8 different programs today and kind of take you behind the scenes about what's gone on these first couple weeks and how it might impact how these teams perform in the fall. Because, for example, Ryan Day, he had a number, and he said it out loud. Big Ten Media Days in front of everybody, the whole world paying attention. He said Ohio State, they need to know their starting offensive line after 9 or 10 practices. Well, just a couple days ago on Saturday, they held practice number 9, and Ryan Day walks off the field and named absolutely nobody, because if you look at what they have, you have Austin Seroveld. He tweaks something minor, and now everything's a little bit up in the air, right? So we're talking about the number 1 team in America going into the 3rd week of August without an official depth chart of the offensive line. That's camp for you. It's not necessarily highlight videos and the entrance music and the highlight reel plays that we're seeing all throughout social media, but it's 105 guys out there in 95-degree heat, and the coaching staff quietly discovering what they thought their team might look like and how their team's actually performing and how do they get them where they need to go. So today we're going to go behind that fence, okay? We're going to go and ask some questions, maybe look into some competitions. We're going to look at receiver room potentially. We're going to look up the team that went off the grid, if you will, kind of disappeared. And then we're going to talk about Dabo Swinney, who's going to talk about his own team in a way that he used to talk about his team back in the day. Just a bunch of quote-unquote nobodies, right? So this is Camp Confidential. But before we get into some of those behind-the-scenes whispers, let's start by breaking down the AP poll. The preseason AP poll is out. We have the top 25 officially. Ohio State's in at number 1, 40 first place votes. We wouldn't push back on that. It's where we have the Buckeyes as well. Oregon is in at number 2. Totally understandable. You look at what they bring back, the quality of their personnel, the defensive line, the quarterback play, all the stuff that matters when it comes to winning titles. They have it all, right? Georgia's in at 3, Notre Dame at 4. Notre Dame a little surprising at 4. With all they bring back, I think they have a really worthy argument to be at worst 3, maybe 2, depending on where you weigh them out. We, of course, have them at number 2. You have Texas, who is at number 5, one of the highest ceilings in college football, but still some things to figure out. And Indiana, the defending national champions, fresh off a 16-0, the first 16-0 team in 130 years, they're in at 6 with only 8 voters that decided to put them at number 1. Now, we wouldn't have it at number 1, but man, 6 feels low. I know they lost a lot. I get it, but that is really low in my opinion. You also have Miami in at 7. That picked up another first place vote. So guys, that if you're counting, you have 5 teams that had first place votes. So clearly a little bit wider. It feels like maybe a bit of a hedge, if you will. A lot of teams that maybe could go and win it all, and we kind of feel that way as well. It feels deeper at the top than it's been in quite some time. You have Texas A&M at number 8. Not a huge surprise there. We have them at 9. Ole Miss is at 9. We have them at 11. We have Oklahoma at 10, just like the AP poll, and LSU at 11, which we have just a couple spots behind them at number 14. So I like LSU where they're at right now. There are question marks. The ceiling's outrageous, but there is a lot of new. And we will break down LSU over the coming days because I really look at the Tigers. Maybe there's a couple things we're glossing over that needs to be figured out before I'm really confident in making them a legitimate title contender. Texas Tech in at 12. Clearly the AP poll voters maybe looking at their final record saying, yeah, probably going to have one of the best records in America. But there are question marks about their quarterback, for example. There are a couple question marks about their ability to compete at the top of the college football world. So they're in at 12. Alabama comes in their lowest ranking since 2008. They are in at number 13. We had them 8, so we are more bullish on the Tide than the current AP poll. You have BYU and SC tied at 14. SC, I think, appropriately ranked right around there. We have them slightly higher. BYU, one of their highest rankings in quite some time as well. Wouldn't surprise any of us if BYU crashed the playoff party by winning the Big 12 this season. Michigan's in at 16, a little higher than what we have them. Washington at 17. Washington, to me, has been a sleeper all throughout the offseason. I think the AP poll nailed this one. While they're a little higher than where we had them, I think Washington is appropriately ranked right there in the teens. It wouldn't shock me at all if after a few weeks, too, that arrow is pointing up for the Huskies. Penn State at 18, SMU at 19, followed by Tennessee, Utah, Iowa, Houston, Louisville, and Missouri. So here's the one aspect of this that might matter the most as we're evaluating the AP Top 25. It's that Clemson's not in it. They are the first team out. They got 112 points. That's more than any other unranked team in America. And the coaches had them 23rd. We had them in the teens. So here's the thing, because I want you to hold that thought just for a little bit, because we will talk about Clemson here in just a little bit. And it frankly, it might pay off. Them being outside the top 25 might be exactly what Dabo Swinney wants to reach his team. So before anyone gets too excited about where they're ranked, why they're ranked, let me just give y'all the number at the end of the day, right? Half of last season's preseason AP Top 25 did not finish in the AP Top 25. 12 teams: Penn State, Clemson, LSU, Arizona State, Illinois, South Carolina, Florida, SMU, Kansas State, Iowa State, Tennessee, and Boise State. All those teams were ranked in the preseason. Fast forward to the end of the year, gone. None of those teams were there. And I'll be honest with you, 4 of the 8 teams that we're talking about tonight are on that list, right? So we want to talk about number 1, which is apparently the greatest thing. We all want that in the preseason. We want to be number 1. But over the course of the last 26 seasons, there have been 2 teams that have opened as the number 1 team in the AP poll that went on to win the national championship. One was USC in 2004. The other was Alabama in 2017. That's it. Just 2 times in 26 years. And in the entire playoff era, Alabama's the only team that went wire to wire from the first poll to the last one. But I remind you, Alabama, they weren't number 1 when they got to the College Football Playoff Committee ranking. They actually lost to Auburn, didn't participate in the SEC championship game. Georgia won the SEC that year, and then Alabama backed their way into the College Football Playoff, where they ultimately beat Georgia in a final game against in a crazy comeback on the 2nd and 26 touchdown that Tua Tagovailoa threw to Devontae Smith. So being number 1 has been a bit of a curse. It has. It's been a bit of a curse. And if you look at 4 preseason number 1 teams, there have been a handful that have actually missed the playoff outright. You look at Ohio State in 15, Alabama in 22, Georgia in 23, and then Texas last season. So where do you actually want to start? Well, you don't want to start first. You might actually want to start second. There have been more national champions in the playoff era that have started the year at number 2 than anywhere else. There have been 5 of them. 3 started at number 3. 1 started at 5. So no team that opened the year 4th has won the whole thing since 2014, which is kind of a fun thing to say, especially when you take into account Notre Dame's one of our favorites in all of college football this year, and they come in at number 4. So if they're going to win the national championship, it will be bucking a trend from the last 13 seasons. And then there's the outlier that kind of ate the sport alive last year. If you look at Indiana a year ago, they finished the season, of course, one of the best teams we've seen in recent history. Well, they started the season ranked 20th. Not 20th in the Big Ten, 20th in college football, right? I mean, there were 19 teams in front of the Hoosiers last year, and they went on to go 16-0 and swept every first-place vote in the final poll. Now, the only other champion in the playoff era to start outside the top 5 was 2019 LSU. They started the season 6th. So the voters have Indiana 6th now with 8 first place votes, which is more than Notre Dame and Miami and more than anybody except Ohio State and Oregon. So you could read that as a sign of respect, but it also probably 8 people in that voting pool that don't want to make the same mistake twice, right? Now, a couple of more things that are worth knowing right now. The SEC, they have 9 teams in the poll. The Big Ten's got 8. The Big Ten, of course, has won 3 straight national champions. But no one in the SEC received a first place vote. No Georgia, no A&M, no Ole Miss, no Texas. And there are 2 teams that weren't in this poll last year, James Madison, Tulane. Well, they obviously made the playoff, weren't in the preseason AP poll. So that's the list. And I know that we have long talked about the importance of preseason polls. They are not the end-all be-all. It is a starting point. And frankly, they're worthless. People will say, well, they matter and it affects and influences how these teams are perceived. I don't disagree with any of that. But if we're doing our job as a member of the College Football Playoff Committee, or if we're doing our job as an analyst or a fan of the sport, we're not going to exclusively use the number next to the name to evaluate what these teams have done and the quality that they're playing with. No, we will start from scratch every single week, which is what we'll do on our show. And that's what I hope the AP poll does as well. So, for example, let's say Team 9 loses early in the season, they should drop accordingly. But if Team 10 wins and looks terrible, they shouldn't move up to 9 just because the team in front of them lost. Let's start from scratch, blank slate every week, and let's evaluate these teams over the course of time. Because what comes a problem is when we dig in and we all of a sudden just shuffle the deck every week based on the previous Saturday's outcomes. That's not the way to do it. Evaluate in victory or defeat who looked good and who didn't, and adjust those rankings accordingly. So we will do that here on our show. That's why you got to lock in. Go subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. You'll get our rankings every single week. Before we get into some insider information with some of the teams that we're going to focus on today, I want to start with a piece of calibration before we evaluate everything. And it's going to come up 5 or 6 times tonight. I don't want anyone to press the panic button just yet. Because right now, as a former college football player, across all of college football, defenses are beating up on the offenses. That's kind of the way it's been. Kirby Smart, for example, the defense at Georgia apparently dominated the first scrimmage, and it apparently has dominated most of camp. And it sounds like Kirby Smart's maybe a little bit frustrated with the offense's performance so far. You actually have heard the same thing from Steve Sarkisian, who said his Texas defense is a little bit ahead right now. You heard from Kalen DeBoer, said that Alabama's defense came out and kind of set the tone, and that the offense could have, quote unquote, executed better, and it led to a couple takeaways. You've actually heard from Dan Lanning, and we haven't heard much from Oregon's camp, but he said that this is the best fall camp Oregon has ever had defensively as far as attacking the football. You listen to Josh Heupel, the offense had some communication challenges. So we're talking about a handful of programs in a bunch of different conferences with various levels of expectation. All of it is the same story. And here's why, because it's not necessarily a talent problem. And people will point to it as a whole talent problem. Well, defense in August is reactive. You line up and you play fast, and you can be pretty good if one guy wins on a particular play. So, for example, for an offensive play to be successful, you need 11 guys all working in unison, all working with great continuity on the same count against a new look, and working simultaneously together. Offense requires all hands on deck. Defense requires one individual winning that play. That's what's so fun about playing offense, is that, hey, it's all of us together, boys. Defensively, yeah, there's team aspects of it, but if a D tackle smokes the right guard and blows up the running back in the backfield, it doesn't mean that the strong safety did his job. It just means the D tackle won. So no one's game planning right now either. They're just base concepts, trying to get the guys to play fast to see who their best players are, not necessarily trying to game plan for the opposition. So there's no opponent, there's no scouting report, there's no tendencies. The more information that the offense has, the more likely they are to be successful. Then, on top of it all, you put a non-contact jersey on the quarterback. You blow the whistle immediately instead of having to actually tackle somebody to the ground. And then every pressure might very well count as a sack. Well, no quarterback on earth ever evades a sack, right? So the scoreboard in August is a bit rigged. It was rigged when I was doing it. It's going to be rigged forever. So I don't necessarily worry myself with seeing this defensive dominance that we've heard about all these scrimmages. The defense is supposed to win at this point of fall camp. Now, I do care when a coach volunteers something that is specific and in some ways unprompted. So that's not necessarily August noise. That's a coach telling you exactly where there might be a legitimate problem. But I'll give you the exception right up front because it's maybe one of the most interesting things we'll talk about. Let's just talk about Dabo Swinney for a second. He came out of Clemson scrimmage on Saturday and said his quarterbacks, his running backs, and his tight ends, they were the bright spots. That the offense took the opening possession, went right down the field and scored, right? In the third week of August, that's the outlier. So hold on to that for just a little bit. But for those of you that are concerned about your offense's performance because your defense is dominating, don't worry. It's supposed to be like that. It's always been that way. It's always going to be that way. The defense will always be ahead of the offense, at least early in fall camp. We will kick things off with the Ohio State Buckeyes. And Ryan Day, he walked off his first practice of camp and listed his concerns. And I'll read you the list. Offensive line, backup quarterback, the reps for the tight ends, receivers 3 through 6, running back, the secondary is a unit. So that's 6 things from the head coach of what we think is the number 1 team in America. And he's right about all 6. So let's start with the offensive line because it's the one that matters most. Look, left guard and center are done, right? You got Montgomery and Hinsman. They're not going anywhere. Now, Sareveld, he's not going anywhere either. He's going to start somewhere. That's a lock. He started all the games at left tackle last year and was pretty dang good, which means you have a handful of guys, Daniels, Moore, and Padilla, 3 players that are vying for 2 jobs right now. And the winner of that fight doesn't just necessarily win a job. The winner decides where Ohio State's best offensive line might play, right? And Day has said it himself. If they get high-level play at tackle, it frees things up to move Sareveld inside at some point. So think about where that leaves them. They returned 4 of 5 starters off the offensive line. And Ryan Day right now still can't tell you exactly who those 5 are going to be. And that's not a problem. That's just the state of the union there in Columbus. Another thing, too, that is worth acknowledging. We've talked about Ohio State and their departures on defense, right? We know they've lost a bunch of starters off that side of the ball, a ton of production on that side of the ball. Well, what people are also saying, it is the second offseason in a row where we've had to replace a top-level talent at defensive tackle. You do it once, and then you reload. You do it twice, and now you're auditioning, and it becomes challenging for most programs. Not at Ohio State. So there's a good news about a name that we continue to hear, and that's Edric Houston, who sounds like he's going to lock down one of those defensive tackle roles, and that was supposed to happen a year ago. Well, he got a little banged up early in camp last year, and it lingered for quite a while. But those that have watched this group practice and play, sounds like Houston might be the best player on the field, not named Jeremiah Smith. So sit with that for a moment. You have pound for pound, maybe the best player in the sport, best receiver in the sport for sure in Jeremiah Smith. And now people are leaving practice talking about a defensive tackle. The other thing that we're hearing about too, and while Day has kind of listed his concerns, he named the receiver spots between 3 and 6 as a question mark. Well, 2 of those positions are accounted for. We know that. One of those positions is Chris Henry. And this guy, by all accounts, everything that we've heard, next level good. Now, he's already rolling in there alongside Jeremiah Smith. Julian's saying it is fully expected that this guy plays a significant role early in his career. He's already making contested catches. He's already done a great job with catch and run situations. And people have just said over and over and over again, like he is way ahead of where they anticipated him being, at least at this point. And that's saying a lot because people had high expectations for this young man the second that he got on campus. So remember the name, Chris Henry Jr. He has a chance to be a real one as soon as this season in his true freshman year. Now, the ceiling here has never really been in question. If you look at what Ohio State has with Julian Sand, Jeremiah Smith, the run game is terrific. Like, we anticipate that depending on who the starting running back ends up being. Maybe it's Isaiah West, not Bo Jackson. So guy that goes for over 1,000 yards right now is running with the twos. Goes to show you just how deep this group is. But if you look at how last season ended, you lose to Indiana in the Big Ten title game, score 10 points in the process. You lose to Miami in the quarterfinal. 2 elimination games, you score 24 total points. So it's not necessarily a talent failure, but it's an offense that couldn't finish drives against an elite defensive front. And frankly, too many sacks, too many pressures, too many negative yardage plays. So the answer to the questions that they had down the stretch last year lies in the starting 5 along the offensive line. And that, as of just a couple days ago, that starting 5 is still up for debate. So Ohio State's going to have time, and they'll be 6-0 before we ever learn anything about what they're capable of. But the real evidence for this offensive line as to whether or not they've taken the next step, we might not find out about that until at least halfway through the season. Moving on to the Oregon Ducks. And one of the best things that Dan Lanning said so far, and there's been very little that's come out about Oregon's camp and how things have gone so far. But Dan Lanning said, hey, the growth that we've seen is encouraging. And he said he actually had spent the morning watching clips of Noah Whittington and Bryce Betcher and Kenyon Sadiq, watching scrimmage from a year ago, and those guys are making all these plays. And all 3 of those guys are obviously in the NFL right now. So it's not necessarily nostalgia. It's a control group. Here's where we were. So Dan Lanning isn't guessing about who's necessarily going to break out. He went back to last year, and he says, this is what we were, and this is what we need to become if we're going to go and compete against the best in college football again. So the scrimmage itself, about 120 plays, apparently, inside Autzen, live tackling for a portion of it at least. And Dan Lanning volunteered a couple concerns after the scrimmage, unprompted. And I think they're the right too. He talked a lot about ball security, which is understandable. He also said you have to kind of clean up the kicking game, and they're kind of getting the kicks that they need to get. And you hold that first one up against the last image that anyone has of this football team, and that was the performance in the Peach Bowl, where ball security was a problem, at least at times, starting with a pick 6 on the opening play. I mean, Dante Moore put the ball on the deck too. So Oregon lost that game. So the head coach comes out of the first big scrimmage of the year and flags the exact thing that came up on the biggest possible stage last season. Now, here's the other half, and this is the good half. Lanning also said that this has been the best fall camp Oregon has ever had defensively as far as taking away the football, attacking the football. And he's talked about tip ball interceptions by Peyton Woodyard, and Lanning was real honest about it. Said some of those turnovers were his defense being aggressive, and some were his offense not protecting it. Same football team, both ends of the turnover margin over the course of 120 plays. So I'm encouraged that the defense is taking it away, but the offense must also protect it. But is it because the defense is elite or because the offense has been a little careless? We don't really know the answer to it right now, and we won't know until they kick off week 1. The second thing, and this is not necessarily something that's uncomfortable, every single fall practice has been closed, all of them. So there's not one firsthand practice observation of a team that's ranked number 2 in America right now, according to the AP poll, which means the most substantive report anyone has on Oregon is a press release from Oregon, right? So what does that mean for the fall? Not a lot. We know that Oregon's ceiling is not a talent question. It isn't a scheme question. It might very well be a possession question, because most of the teams that Oregon faces this season, they will have superior talent. They will. They're going to be, Dante Moore turned down the top 5 draft pick. The secondary is one of the deepest in the Big Ten. The offensive line is rotating 8 deep right now, and they feel pretty good about it. We know it's probably the best defensive line in America as well. And this might be a 16, 17 game season. So I think it's very, very important for them to continue to grow and make sure those mistakes that might be made by the offense, those have to disappear, or at least be as minimal as humanly possible. Because if Oregon just stays on their baseline, they can beat anyone in the sport. But if they decide to be a little careless with the football, their quality and their ceiling could drop down just a little bit, where they could get got when they shouldn't, right? So here's the structural point about everything with Oregon. They are one of those teams that we really can't get a real evaluation of them until they play. And Boise State in the opener, that's not some tune-up, right? But it might be the first piece of information that anybody outside the building gets all year. Moving on to the South Carolina Gamecocks, where they announced on Sunday night that receivers Jaden Sellers and Jaden Gibson will both miss the upcoming season. Now, Sellers especially disappointing because he's a sophomore, went down in Saturday night scrimmage. It sounded like he'd had a really good fall camp up to this point. Jaden Gibson was hurt in practice last week. The program said that it was a lower body injury for both, and that's all the program said, and that's all I'm going to say. But if you listen to Shane Beamer, he's extremely disappointed about these young men. He knows how hard each of those guys worked through the spring and summer to get ready for the fall. And they're the second and the third, right? Because receiver Jackson Rep got hurt over the summer. He's out for the year as well. So that's 3 receivers that have been lost over the course of 3 weeks. 1 in June, 1 last week, 1 on Saturday night. It just puts an awful lot of pressure on Nick Harbor, who is the former 5-star who chose to come back to Columbia, kind of puts him in the middle of a brand new offense, specifically built to stretch a defense from sideline to sideline before going over the top with heavy play action. So that system, it eats bodies. And there are 3 fewer bodies for South Carolina than they had just a couple weeks ago. A couple more names too. Jacarius Peak and their edge rusher, Dylan Stewart. They're still not yet practicing in full by all accounts. And Jacarius Peak was their left tackle addition from NC State that they have really high hopes for. And remember, this is a new offense. And if you listen to Shane Beamer, the read on both is very encouraging. Those guys are on track. They're going to be ready for the opener. But it matters a little more than just your normal injury list, because if you look at Lenora Sellers, we know he's a freshman All-American a couple years ago. He was amazing, right? Threw for over 2,500 yards, 18 touchdowns, ran for almost 700. But last year, you saw things dip a little bit. You saw completion percentage drop by 5 points. You saw his rushing total drop from 674 to 270. So new offensive coordinator, completely new offensive staff with Kendall Briles. He comes in from TCU. Briles and his offensive line coach from TCU, Randy Clements, those guys are all together. You bring over Stan Drayton, who's going to be the assistant head coach for the offense as well. You've had 4 different play callers in 6 years, and it's the right hire. I love Kendall Briles. Very aggressive, very quarterback friendly. And Lenora Sellers, he's got the size and the arm talent, the open field ability to be as dangerous as anybody when he's playing really fast. So the protection must hold first. And while Lenoris, he is capable of doing it himself, he's shown it before, you don't want him to. So having depth at wide receiver, having quality engagement with the offensive line, that is really, really important because this portal class is solid, right? They were top 20 portal class in the country, and they went heavily into the line of scrimmage because that protection has to be better than it was a year ago. Now, everything about this offseason says that South Carolina is going to bounce up in a big way. They were 9-4 in 2024, and they opened last season ranked in the top 13 and finished a very disappointing 4-8. And their own athletic department describes the season as they were competitive in every game with fourth quarter struggles that produced the record. So they didn't necessarily get run out of the building. They just couldn't close on several occasions. And then you get Lenora Sellers, Nick Harbor, Dylan Stewart, big time, high level prospects coming off a 4-8 season and a bad year where maybe things aren't going right. Guys go to the portal in that scenario. No, they all decided to come back. So Beamer is framing things in a way that really excites me. There's a lot of guys that could easily be elsewhere right now, and they chose to come back, and your investment level equals your expectation level. So the plan is right, and everything looks like this could be a huge bounce back, but they need to make sure they create as much quality depth as they can at the wide receiver spots and create continuity along the offensive line to take some of the pressure off Lenora Sellers so he doesn't feel obligated to do it all himself. Hopefully, they still have quality depth there in Columbia, because if they don't, it could be challenging for them to navigate what might be a gauntlet of a 12-game SEC schedule. Moving on, just down the street in South Carolina, talking about the Clemson Tigers. I told y'all earlier in the show to kind of hold the thought on the Clemson Tigers, because Dabo Swinney over the last couple weeks, right, whether it was the ACC media days, kind of stood in front of a room that just watched his team disappoint. They went 7-6. Very disappointing season, especially given the preseason expectations. And he said, go back and check out all the headlines from the spring of 2011. That's what he said. He said, go read 2011. Well, the last time Clemson opened a season unranked in the AP poll was ironically 2011. Now, the coaches poll came out a couple weeks ago, had them at 23, which was their lowest spot in that poll since 2011 as well. Now the AP has added to that, right? So they're the first team out. They have more than any other unranked team in the country with 112 points. And yeah, doesn't qualify for the top 25. But Dabo Swinney picked the exact year, and he did that in July. He had no idea. They opened last season 6th in the coaches poll, but they were 3-5 by November. Yeah, they finished 7-6. They finished unranked. They went and got a bunch of guys, went to the portal, 9 to the NFL draft. And then Dabo Swinney opened up by erasing the depth chart. Said, nobody's starting. Somebody's got to run out there today because you have to practice. But if you're first tomorrow, it's because you earned it today. It is a complete meritocracy. And then a couple days later, he called his own roster a quote-unquote bunch of nobodies. That's not a coach managing expectations. That's a coach that is pressing the motivational buttons. Now, the quarterback battle is probably the biggest topic of conversation when it comes to Clemson right now, understandably. You have Christopher Vezina going against a true freshman in Tate Reynolds. And if you listen to sources that are close to the program, they said the competition is kind of centering around one thing. How quickly does the ball come out of the quarterback's hand? It has to do maybe in some ways with release, but also understanding, comprehension, trust. And they talk a lot about, Taj Boyd and the great quarterbacks that have come in the past. We've seen a million of them play for Clemson in the last 15 years. A lot of great quarterback play. Well, how quickly can you get the ball out? And we know that Tate Reynolds had a really quick release, really quick mechanics. And if you listen to those that have watched Vezina closely, a little bit loopier in his motion, a little bit more deliberate, but that's okay. That's fine. As long as he goes to the right place on time on a regular basis. And if you look at Chad Morris, who's back running the offense and coaching the quarterbacks, he's running quarterbacks through drills that are built almost entirely about getting the ball out of the hands really, really quickly. And ironically, Taj Boyd's coaching it, right? So Morris's first quarterback at Clemson is running that room, teaching the exact traits that made him a special player. But here's the thing that makes this a little bit more than a hot take, is that the knock on Vezina over the course of his career was velocity on far hash throws. And where if you're trying to throw it from the right hash all the way to the left sideline, a few inches could be the difference between a first down and a pick six. And I think it's perfectly fine to maybe not have that throw in your arsenal all the time, because how often are you really trying to make it? But it's not purely about arm strength. Getting the ball out on time because you already know where you're going with it is the equivalent of throwing with ridiculously high velocity. We know that Reynolds has a bigger arm, but Vezina's understanding can manufacture the same arm strength with his brain by getting rid of the ball a half second quicker. Well, Saturday, however, the scrimmage has really settled nothing as of this point, right? Both guys threw touchdowns. Both guys ran it well. There was a pick six thrown to a linebacker, and Swinney would not tell anybody who threw it. And he asked if it was going to change his timeline. And he just said, it's the next step in the process. But the most telling detail of camp wasn't necessarily a throw. On day one, Christopher Vezina was front and center between the offense and the defense, leading the warm-up jumping jacks. And that spot, historically, has been reserved for the team leader. And there is some intentionality in everything that Clemson does. Read that as you will. Because we know that Clemson goes on the road to LSU in Lane Kiffin's debut. Tiger Stadium, first Saturday of the season. So Clemson's season could very easily be defined very early by a road trip to Baton Rouge before anyone really knows who they are. We know that they're relatively young. We know that they didn't run the ball very well last year. They know that this has been a time where it feels like they got to start adopting modern day principles when it comes to roster building and things like that. But still feel pretty optimistic about what Dabo Swinney is saying right now, because he's kind of saying the quiet part out loud about this era. Defending Christopher Vezina, saying that if he had transferred, he'd be treated like he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and everyone would be writing articles about how great he is because he's now the answer to wherever he would have gone to. He's the answer to all the questions that program has been looking for. And that's just the nature of the world that we're living in these days. And Clemson didn't go to the portal and get a quarterback. The LSU, meanwhile, the team they opened against, they signed 41 transfers. And Clemson has continued to lean into their philosophy. They have, however, welcomed in more portal additions this year than they have at any other time in recent history. So the version of Clemson that could win 10 games this year, they're going to be the ones that are deliberate. They're going to be the ones that are better on defense than most people anticipate. They're going to be the ones that have stability of the quarterback spot because we know they have weapons. We know they have talent. But we're not going to know exactly what they're going to be until about 3 weeks from now. And nobody does right now, including Dabo Swinney and everybody that is associated with that program. Moving on to the Alabama Crimson Tide. August 20th is the date that everyone's circled. Everyone's treating August 20th like the quarterback date. That's when it's going to be announced and all these things. It's Thursday, just a couple days from now. It's Alabama's second scrimmage. And everyone assumes that's when Kalen DeBoer will name a starter. That's not necessarily what it is because Ryan Grubb wants the quarterback decision and the starting offensive line to land on the same day. So the offense gets continuity heading into the opener with a couple weeks to prepare. So Thursday isn't necessarily an announcement. It's the entire offense being introduced to itself, right? And it's 16 days before they welcome East Carolina in for the season opener. And right now they don't know. And if you listen to Kalen DeBoer after the first scrimmage, he said verbatim, I don't feel closer with the quarterback answer. They asked about the offensive line. Definitely not there yet. And if you listen to those that are focusing on the battles and you're talking to those that are inside the program, Austin Mack is stringing together consistent day after consistent day. There have been times, though, when Keelan Russell has those moments where he absolutely dazzles, right? And apparently, because of some leaky protection in the first scrimmage, it lended itself towards Keelan Russell having a slightly better performance. He had a couple touchdowns. People have already talked about his upside, his ceiling, his talent level. And I think a lot of people will look at what the offense is. And if the offensive line struggles, having a mobile quarterback could very well be the difference. And that might be entirely true. And if you listen to one other thing, what's been the issue with Alabama the last 2 years? It's the offensive line play. The concerning part is that both quarterbacks were under duress on several dropbacks, had to escape and make plays on the move. And in that type of setting, we know that Russell is going to look like the better guy in that scenario. Well, think about what that means. A scrimmage where the protection is a little leaky is not great. And it's accidentally going to be engineered for a guy that can run and move and create. That doesn't mean that Keelan Russell's day wasn't great. It was. It just means that his skill set is going to better be exemplified and put forward when things are kind of up in the air and everyone else isn't necessarily performing at a level that they need to perform at. So when Kalen DeBoer walks out the field and tells everybody he doesn't feel any closer, that's complete indicator because one guy's been more consistent. One guy has had a higher ceiling. One guy has had a little lower low. So that's okay. That's to be expected, at least in the first couple of weeks of fall camp. Now, the second thing, and it's a tough one, right? Alabama finished 125th in the nation running the football last year. 104 yards a game, just 1,150 yards on the year, 14 touchdowns, and less than 3.5 per carry as a team. That's Alabama, right? And the deeper problem wasn't necessarily volume, it was consistency. And that run game, it kept putting the offense behind schedule into obvious passing downs. And it just made everything else harder, no matter who was on the field. And that's the position where Alabama could least afford anything to go wrong. And running back has been a bit of a problem, at least with injuries here early on. A.K. Deere got hurt at the end of the first scrimmage. He scored and had a really good day, apparently, and was widely considered maybe one of the breakthrough players here in the early part of fall camp. Well, he now goes down with an ankle injury. Sounds like he's going to miss an extended period of time. Some people are saying as many as 6 weeks, potentially. E.J. Crowell, who's a 5-star freshman, one of the highest-rated signees in the class, he didn't participate in the scrimmage. It sounds like he's going to miss a couple practices, but shouldn't miss any games. So they do have 3 backs that did have some catches and some carries last fall. And sources keep pointing to a true freshman named Trayshawn Brown, who continues to impress. He did so in the spring. Now he has a strong scrimmage performance. And it sounds like he could be expected to contribute right away. And that's really, really important. Now, another thing that you listen to those inside the building, there is a ton of confidence right now that Alabama might have one of the better defensive lines in America. And people that have watched this scrimmage, they said it was quote unquote dominant, really, and very, very impressive. And the detail underneath is the one that I care most about. And it's not necessarily pressure, but they added some size, they added some length across the front, could make throwing lanes very difficult, which means tipped passes, which means turnovers. And a bigger defensive line doesn't always just get to the quarterback, but taking away the windows where he's trying to throw it, that can be impactful as well. Devin Tompkins, who transfers in from SC, people have circled him as one of the best additions on the roster. We know the secondary is legit. It's been one of the top groups in America the last couple of years. Sounds like they did a great job in coverage. And almost everything the offense got came from a quarterback extending the play and making plays off schedule. And while Alabama, there's a lot to like about what they have back from a talent standpoint. They also brought in a handful of transfers. And the one that a lot of people are talking about running the defense there at the second level, Caleb Woodson, who got a ton of speed. Originally started his career by playing safety at Virginia Tech. He's now up to 238 pounds. He played in 9 games last year, made nearly 60 tackles. Sounds like he's going to be the guy that might be wearing the green dot. So that's the helmet communicator, a guy that relays the call. He's kind of the voice of the coaches on the field. So to see how his transition has become is significant because linebacker was a position of concern. Now it's sounding like it could be a position of strength for the Tide. See all the noise around the program about Kalen DeBoer's seat and where he's at and the Rose Bowl performance and the 7-year extension. Well, camp is telling you that right now what's actually going on in Tuscaloosa is a team taking shape. It's just not the team that you've come to expect. It's a defense-first football team with an offense that is at the time, right now, a work in progress. But the defense is going to keep Alabama in every single game they play. Now, the question is whether an offense that meets itself on Thursday can score enough in September and October to allow the fourth quarter conversion to happen the way they want it to happen, right? Because if you look at the Rose Bowl, it was not just a defensive failure. It was just an overall frustrating performance, all things together. But if this offense can gel quickly in the next 20 days and the defense can continue to play at the level they've played at here in the first couple of weeks of camp, Alabama is exactly who we thought they were going to be. And that, to me, is still a national championship contender. And while the AP has them at 13, I still believe they're a top 10 team, assuming that offense can come together and they figure out what the quarterback position is going to look like. The Arizona State Sun Devils. Now, I want to take you somewhere different because Arizona State does something that almost nobody does anymore. They kind of go. They leave. They pack up after practice. They drive north out of Tempe. They go up into the mountains into a place called Camp Tontezoma. And in 2026, in an era where fall camp is like fenced-in practice facility and a 25-minute, maybe a 10-minute media window, and a compliance officer standing over there right behind the photographers saying, you can't do that, you can do that. Well, Arizona State, they're taking their football team into the woods, right? And here's the part that fits this. I love this, right? Arizona State runs a formal injury reporting policy. Reporters are not allowed to watch practice, but they're not allowed to write anything about who's limited or who's absent until Kenny Dillingham addresses it himself. And the reporters say so in print, in the middle of their own practice reports. So it's not a closed camp and it's not necessarily an open camp. It's a camp where you can see everything and report just a little above it, right? But now moving on to the football, because Arizona State, they have a really interesting quarterback room in the Big 12. Sam Leavitt left. He's now at LSU. You have a couple guys that were drafted early, right? Jordan Tyson being the best example. So Kenny Dillingham went and got a couple quarterbacks. He goes and gets Cutter Boley, who came over from Kentucky. He was the first player to commit to Arizona State when the portal opened on January 2nd, inside of 48 hours, which tells you exactly who the target was. And his numbers last year at Kentucky were impressive. 2,100 yards, 65.8% completion, 15 touchdowns, but the 12 interceptions. That's the problem. And that's the entire scouting report. And then there's Mikey Keene. And this is the part that people are kind of missing. He's been around for a while, right? He's out of Chandler, Arizona, started a bunch of games at UCF, started a bunch of games at Fresno State. He's got 34 career starts and over 8,000 career passing yards. He led the Mountain West in completion percentage last year. Now, he sat out some time at Michigan, decides to come home. Boley is ahead when it comes to talent, for sure, but it sounds like Keene is maybe a little cleaner running the operation. And the beats read is that, one, it should maybe scare the rest of the league. If Mikey Keene loses the job, which could very well happen, he's a very reliable quarterback. He's been around for a while. He could be a very serviceable backup. But there's a bunch of other guys in the room that people are excited about as well. And Cameron Dyer, Jake Fetty, true freshman that they sound like he could force his way into the competition as well. But Boley and Keene, they've been rotating through the first team and the second team. And Dillingham's not going to rush anything just yet. But Keene has said that the quarterbacks are really supportive of one another. So you have a bunch of guys that really want it bad. There's no animosity, but it's good for the overall room. It still sounds like, though, Cutter Boley is the guy to beat for the quarterback spot there in Tempe. Now, Kenny Dillingham, we know what this means, right? We know that there was some speculation about Michigan maybe looking into the possibility of him taking the job, but he's an Arizona State guy, right? He passed on bigger opportunities. He's probably going to continue to pass on bigger opportunities. And the reward for him came out this morning. In the AP poll that we gave you a little while ago, lists 25 teams, another 25 that got a bunch of points. Well, guess what? Arizona State did not get one. Not 1 point. Not one receiving vote. Not one. Liberty got a point. Western Michigan got a point. ASU got nothing. Which, if you've watched this man for 3 years, this is the precise set of conditions under which he does his best work. And the last time a preseason poll disrespected Arizona State, they were picked 16th out of 16 in the Big 12. Well, Dillingham tacked that to the bulletin board and went out and won the conference. He also rebuilt this offense out of the portal. One of the top transfer classes in America, including arguably the top-ranked transfer receiver in the class as well. And his goal for that room isn't necessarily a highlight goal. It's a schematic, right? He expects that receiver room to really force this defense that they're trying to guard, right? This receiver room could very well take over the game. And they're probably going to catch a lot of football. They're going to catch a lot of footballs. We know that. So the floor is pretty high, and the ceiling is almost entirely the quarterback competition because we know Cutter Boley, while talented, did throw 12 picks last year. And the entire 2024 Arizona State miracle was built on a quarterback who protected the football. So if Boley can cut those picks in half, this could be a team that factors into the top of the Big 12 with arguably the one of the better receiver groups in the entire conference. And if Boley doesn't protect the football, well, Mike Keene's right there with 34 career starts and a much lower variance football team. So worth watching out there in Tempe. The Tennessee Volunteers. Look, before we get into anything else about Tennessee, right? Tennessee came in at 20 in the AP poll, which is 4 spots better than they opened last year. And last year they finished the season unranked. But before anything else about Tennessee, they also lost their junior safety, Edris Farouk, to a patella tendon in his right knee on Friday morning's practice. And it's really disappointing because he's out for the season. You also have sophomore linebacker Jaden Harmon, who's out for the year as well. So 2 guys who put an entire offseason of work will not play this fall, and I'm really disappointed about that for them. But they did scrimmage on Saturday. 2 hours inside Neyland, close to the media, close to the public. Sounds like live tackling on more than half the snaps. So it's not a walkthrough. And afterward, Josh Heupel got asked whether he'd gained any clarity at the quarterback spot. He answered with one word, no. And then you have to kind of look at what he actually did in there, right? George McIntyre and Faison Brandon rotated series with the first team offense and with the second team offense too. So you don't necessarily run a guy through both units if you have a clear leader. You do that when you genuinely can't tell. So Heupel's, I guess, read on what the team was, maybe a couple communication issue early, clean things up, and then as it went, both them started to play at a pretty high level. Sounds like they made some plays down the field. Sounds like they worked through their progressions. And the thing that he volunteered in general, is that they're taking really good care of the football, which is massive. Then asked if he was any closer, he says he wants to go watch the tape. And we know the second scrimmage is coming up this upcoming Saturday on the 22nd. He's not going to name anybody before that, at least at the earliest. Now, the strength of the defense, though, maybe a touch thinner. Because before Friday, if you asked anybody around the program what you loved about Tennessee, it was a lot of people said, well, the safeties are going to be really good with Tevis Metcalf, and people are saying that he's the real deal. And DeJuan Lane, who's big and athletic, and Farouk, who had a great spring and carried that over into camp. Well, that room's still good. You still have two legitimate players, and you got great coaching in the back end, but a deep and super athletic back end was something that people really felt good about, and it's not going to be the same depth because of the injury to Farouk. Now, Jim Knowles, he's going to do a great job with this defense. They also are going to employ a Leo position, which is kind of a hybrid stand-up rush end. That's a guy who's going to get to the quarterback from a two-point stance. And right now they're trying to figure out who is that guy going to be? Who's that guy that's going to be attacking the way it was? You can go slightly bigger and go and get a guy like maybe David Hobbs, who can play inside. He's now taking some reps at end. Sounds like you have some more guys that are rolling through it as well. They've even explored some 3 linebacker looks. So I look at the assessment of this group in general, and they got to be a little bit more consistent. But, man, I still feel pretty good about what this group has together. Because the defense, we know they got to have that pass rush. We know that secondary's got to cover. We know all that. The secondary just lost a piece. But Tennessee's offseason is going to be in a good spot. I still feel good about where they are. I still feel really good. So while their quarterback might be young, might have 0 career starts against a 9-game SEC schedule, and maybe the plan was that Jim Knowles' defense could carry them at least at the early part of the season, that was always a reasonable expectation. Well, it does adjust a little bit because of an injury or two. Still very optimistic about what this group can be. And if you listen to Josh Heupel's line about both quarterbacks, they're taking care of the football. That's exactly what you want to hear from a young first-time starter. So they're trending in the right direction. I still feel very good about what they might do this season. Moving on to the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, Iowa is 22nd this year. Every program we've talked about kind of has a date, right? Alabama has said the 20th. Tennessee has said the 22nd. Clemson has a couple weeks. Ohio State said 9 or 10 practices before they named the offensive line. Iowa's given us nothing because here's Kirk Ferentz verbatim on when he'll name a starting quarterback. He said, quote, "Right now we don't know the answer. I can only tell you we'll know the answer when we know it. Hopefully sometime in August that will become apparent." And then he says this, "It may be in season. Can't rule out any possibilities." In season. This is a man that's openly telling you that he might actually play a game, maybe more than one, before he decides who his starting quarterback is going to be. Here's what happened just a couple days ago. They hold Kids Day there at Kinnick, which is open practice, crowd that is in the stands, and Jeremy Hecklinski, he thoroughly outplayed Hank Brown. By everyone's account, it wasn't really close. It was a really good afternoon, but Kirk Ferentz didn't move an inch. He said, look, I need to look at them over 9 days. And then the line that he said is clearly cloudy right now. So every day's been a little different. It's been going back and forth, and that's exactly what you'd expect. But here's the tell. Ferentz finally named his tiebreakers. He said leadership and smart decision-making on the field. Not necessarily arm strength, not athleticism, not who threw the prettiest ball on Kids Day, which means he thinks that physical tools might be even. It could come down to who runs the huddle better. So another thing about Iowa's camp is that Iowa won the Joe Moore Award last year. That's the trophy for the best offensive line in America. They lost a handful of starters, including Logan Jones, who was a consensus All-American, became the second Hawkeye to win the Remington Trophy, and Bo Stevens. And everyone assumed that Cade Piper, a legitimate preseason All-American, would slide inside to play center. Well, then Ferentz opened the door to a walk-on in Cale Winter from Waukee, Iowa, who has quietly climbed the depth chart all summer. And here's why it's better than a normal position battle. If Cale Winter can win the center spot, that means Cade Piper can stay out there at tackle. And that's not a walk-on beating out an All-American. That's a walk-on freeing one, right? One man wins a job, and Iowa now solves 2 holes on the line, replacing the Remington winner. So that's in significant development as well. And Iowa, look, they didn't lose a piece of its special teams. They lost the whole thing, right? We know LeVar Woods left for Michigan State, took his punter with him. The kicker graduated. We know Wetjen, who was a consensus All-American return specialist. He's now catching passes in Pittsburgh. Well, Chris Polizzi, he takes over. It's his first time ever as a coordinator at any level. So kicker, punter, long snapper, kick return, all that is open. So what does that mean? Well, that's significant, right? Especially when you think about how Iowa wins football games with field position and elite special teams play. So here's the number. Iowa went 9-4 last year. All 4 losses came to Indiana, Oregon, SC, and Iowa State. The total margin of defeat across those 4 games was 15 points. The margins were 3-5, 2, and 5. The largest single loss all season was by 5 points. Now, it's the 11th consecutive winning season, and it's the most Iowa thing that's ever happened. You don't get blown out, but they got to now get over the top. And Phil Parker has held opponents under 20 points a game for 10 straight years, and that's the longest active streak in college football. So Iowa is going to be in every single game they play. That is not in doubt, which means the season turns on 2 games that decide one-possession football games, right? Quarterback play and the kicking game. So as of this morning, Iowa does not know who their quarterback is. They do not know who their kicker is. They do not know who their punter is. And they don't know right now exactly who's going to be returning kicks. But guys, it's Iowa, right? They're going to figure out special teams. But this is a team that lost 4 games by a combined 15 points. And they need every marginal possession game to kind of go their way. So before Hawkeye fans start panicking, let me just give you the other side. And I believe it. Don't panic. This is a process. Kirk Ferentz waited until the middle of August to name Mark Gronowski last year, and Iowa went on to win 9 games. He's been doing this for 28 years. He's the winningest coach in the history of that conference. So Iowa isn't behind. They are just deliberately unhurried in a sport that has kind of forgotten how to be unhurried, if you will. One thing I noticed kind of putting all this together, I don't think it's an accident. Half of what feels like a mystery this August isn't necessarily a mystery. It's an active decision for coaches to put up a gigantic fence. It used to be much easier to get information. I'm just going to be honest with you. It used to be a lot easier to get information, but now coaches are concerned about maybe this diamond in the rough that they're kind of shelving and they're hiding. They don't want to talk about this guy because the second he becomes a known commodity, people are going to try to go get him in the portal. So if you just kind of look at it, I mean, Oregon's closed every camp. Miami lets reporters watch, and they can't necessarily describe who the drill. They can't describe who won it. LSU has been closing things. They've had about 30 minutes of access all camp. Indiana, they bar the media from reporting any depth chart related, right? A&M, they do the exact same. SC, they can't even necessarily tell you who's out there catching punts at Lincoln Riley's request, right? So all this, you're not necessarily arguing about access by any stretch. All I'm saying is that the information exists, just it's harder to find now than it's ever been. And it's going to continue to be that way because these coaches, they are more tight-lipped than ever when it comes to finding out what's going on behind closed doors. So we went through 8 programs, had a lot of fun with it, with Oregon, Ohio State, South Carolina, Clemson, Alabama, Arizona State, Tennessee, and Iowa. And camp is fun. So it's the last month of the year where everybody is undefeated. Nobody knows anything. And I love it more than I can even tell you. So we're just a couple weeks away. Week 0 will be here before we know it. Before we get you out of here, if you could, just go and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. You can also go and check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.